We are so fortunate to have with us tonight Dr. Ruth Levine, who is Director of Evaluation and Policy Analysis and Learning for the United States Agency for International Development. The Taylor and Francis Award, as far as I'm concerned, is one of the biggest deals that ICOE has to give. We really want to honor someone who is an example of the best practice of what women's research can do in order to make lives better for women, and in order to make lives better for girl children, and in order to change the world. Being a health economist is a big deal. The work that Dr. Levine has done has had an impact in just about every continent that exists. Her work has reached Latin America, East Africa, the Middle East, South Asia, and it's reached here in the country where she came from. We're extremely proud of Dr. Ruth Levine. She's had a really distinguished career, and she's really not all that old. And look at all that she's done, and I say that, I've had a couple of glasses of wine, but I'm a gerontologist. So I look at life histories and careers, and I'm used to, giving a, first she did this, and then she did this, and then she did this. In the 1990s, before some of you were born, she was already serving as the advisor in social sectors for large American banks. I mean, she was doing things like that before she had a research career. I think that probably served you well because you got to hobnob with people who were important and you learned how to make a difference. One of the last sessions today, we heard from people who were talking to us about what foundations do in order to raise money and how they recognize best practices. I don't really know Dr. Ruth Levine personally, but I suspect she learned a lot about how to do things by getting to hobnob with people who were in influential positions. She's interested in reducing poverty around the world, in empowering women, and I could say a whole lot, but I think the most important thing for me to say is I'm extremely proud to be in the same room with Dr. Ruth Levine, so please welcome her to the podium.
Thank you so much for that extremely effusive introduction. I'm absolutely delighted, grateful for this opportunity to talk to such a committed and influential and important group. I'm particularly thrilled to be at the University of Pennsylvania. And I was here last May for the graduation of my stepdaughter, and who got her bachelor's degree. And I earned new respect in her eyes because she was thrilled that I knew personally the person who was the most colorful member of the commencement ceremony, Afaf, the Dean of the School of Nursing. So, when you shine in the eyes of your children, then you know you've really arrived. So it's wonderful to get a chance to be here and to offer some remarks, which are mostly based on work that I did when I was at the Center for Global Development, where I was up until a month ago when I joined USAID. And so I need to offer a disclaimer that what I'll talk about, although it's not controversial in any way, really represents more that work than any positions of the US government. I started thinking about these remarks when I was at CGD, when I had all the answers, and I was offering recommendations for public policy. And now that I am at the U.S. Agency for International Development, I can tell you that I only have questions. And I have a call for help from all of you, which I will offer at the end of my remarks. I've long known, as I think you all know, that one of the most important aspects of creating a sound public policy is to think carefully about what the future holds and to try to shape the policy response today so that it gets us as ready as we can be for the challenges ahead. And when I think about the future and trying to predict what the future looks like, I am often taken by the metaphor of the future that I'm told the Aymara Indians in the Andes have, which is, as I understand it, not being an anthropologist, which is that they think of the future as being in back of them, where they can't see, and that what's in front, where they can see, is the past. And so they're essentially walking backward into the future. And so I like that image a lot, even though it's not from my culture, where we walk forward into the future. We can see perfectly. But I like that image because it suggests that you sort of use what you can see to navigate where you go, but you have to walk a little bit carefully. There may be holes and things that you bump into along the way. So that's really, in some sense, more what we face, or what we, now I can't even escape the metaphors, what we face when we're talking about the future. I think we can see 5 trends that shape not only what awaits us, but more importantly, what awaits our children. And those are, and I know many of these have been talked about in the sessions, really profound demographic change, urbanization, climate change, economic change, and epidemiologic change. Those 5 are, in many ways, very predictable. We can look out 20, 30 years and see many of the things that are very likely to happen. And they certainly guarantee that the world of 2020 and 2050 will look very different from today. So let's just think about the first, demographic change, and I'll just offer a few highlights. No PowerPoint presentations. You've had enough of those today. Yeah. So let me offer just a few highlights around each of those kinds of changes. With the dramatic decreases in fertility and the improvements in life expectancy throughout the world, although with some uneven spots and some reversals in life expectancy in some countries, combined with a legacy of high fertility and so the momentum of population growth in countries that have had high fertility in the relatively recent past, what we know is that, with some quite a bit of confidence, is that between 2005 and 2030, most of the vast majority of population growth will occur in the less developed countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, where the population growth rates are much higher than in the developed world. And while Asia's share of the world's population will be at about 60%, through 2050, Europe's will shrink the share of population, while Africa will gain part of that portion, you might say. So there'll be a really major shift in the kind of center of gravity in terms of population size and growth rates. And there will also be important transitions in the age structure. Right now, we have the largest cohort of adolescents, a real youth bulge, and I know that many of you come from countries where this is a profound social challenge and perhaps opportunity, as the number of 12 and 20 to 24-year-olds estimated at 1.5 billion represents such a significant share of the population. Over the next decades, the average age of the population will rise and will, in many ways, really reveal itself in the differences between the countries that are now high income and those that are low and middle income. So by about 2020, not far off, the average age will rise to more than 40 years in the developed world, and will be right around 20 years in least developed countries. So a real continuing divergence. So that's one trend that we can quite easily predict and that has consequences and opportunities within it. Second, which has been talked about many times here, so I won't belabor it, is the trend toward urbanization, which will certainly continue. More than half the population in developing countries now lives in urban areas, obviously not just mega cities, but in the secondary and tertiary cities. And by 2030, an estimated 5 billion people will live in cities, 8 out of 10 of them in developing countries. A third trend, environmental change of many sorts, but certainly climate change, with its shifts in the geographic reach of infectious diseases, particularly zoonotic diseases, greater incidence and severity of extreme weather, which we've certainly seen. Hard to know whether to attribute it all to climate change, but certainly most scientists are predicting much more prevalence or incidence of extreme weather conditions, and so the need for more kind of safety nets and shock absorbers in public policy for that, as well as changes in food supply. Fourth major trend is economic, and this again is quite predictable, although of course from year to year it's hard to know exactly where things will go. But certainly a trend toward a greater market pull in the South and the East. So in high-income countries, economic growth rates are expected to be at about 2% over the foreseeable future of many years. And in low and middle-income countries, higher growth rates of up to 7% on average. So what this means is that industries will be more and more attracted to responding to the growing demand and the potential for growth in revenues in low and middle income countries. And I think we're all familiar with the prediction that by 2050, the total gross domestic product of China will exceed that of the United States, while of course the per capita income will still be much lower. So that's the fourth of 5 trends, and the fifth, related to the others, is an increase in the prevalence of chronic disease in developing countries. This is just such a dramatic phenomenon. 120 to 140% increase in mortality in the past, between 1990 and 2020, predicted from chronic heart disease, 90% increase in diabetes in developing countries by 2030, 50% projected increase in the incidence of cancer by 2025. This is partly a result of our success in dealing with infectious diseases and extending life expectancy, but it is also the result of the adoption of unhealthful behaviors and the social conditions that make it much more likely for people to have relatively little physical activity and to not and to eat high-fat, high-salt diets. It is certainly not just a problem of the old and not just a problem of the rich. So if we can predict these changes based on the trends of the past and some, frankly, mathematical formulas when it comes to looking, for example, at population change, are we ready for them? Are our children ready for them? Is the public policy of today being created to make societies more resilient to the challenges ahead? You know, I'm struck that this is the world when we talk about this time span between now and 2050, this is the world of the Millennium Development Babies. And I think about the Millennium Development Babies as being the children who were born in the year 2000 when 190-some leaders were signing the Millennium Declaration with its ambitious goals. Those children are 10 years old today, just entering the very beginning of their adolescence. In 2020, they will be in the working world, and they will have completed building their own families by 2050. So this is really their world. And they are, as I said, entering adolescence now. Are they ready to be part of the solution to address these challenges ahead? Well, on average, they are in fact much healthier and more educated and subject to less of certain types of vulnerability than any previous generation. And I think we can take a lot of encouragement and inspiration from how much progress has been made. There have been, for example, in many parts of the world, including the poorest countries of sub-Saharan Africa, unprecedented increases in primary school enrollment in the past 15 years at rates of improvement that were never seen in the developed world, really have exceeded all historical trends. The movement toward gender parity in primary education also, frankly, I think one of the great emerging success stories in development. Child marriage is on course on the right course in the parts of the world where it has been most prevalent. The percentage of women married by age 19 dropped from about 27% in 1989 to about 20% in the year 2000. But of course, there is much more to be done. And there's a tremendous untapped resource that I think can be found in this Millennium Development generation. We have not in any way fulfilled our collective commitment to those MDG babies, and particularly the girls. And I know that much of the discussion at this conference has been about the problems of the health and other problems that women face, and in some of the sessions, adolescent girls. So again, I'll just sort of give once over lightly of some of these issues. While there's been major progress in getting both boys and girls into primary school, relatively few children in the poorest countries make the transition to secondary school, a particular problem for girls. And I know that this was the subject of one of the sessions earlier today. You know, it strikes me that there's an interesting relationship with or comment to make about urbanization. One of the most common reasons for migration to urban areas among adolescents is a quest for better education. But a survey of migrant girls in Ethiopia showed that while 44% reported moving for education, 35% were still out of school at the time of the survey, so that their hopes had not been realized. So clearly, access to secondary education from that small study and much larger aggregate data reflects an important problem. In terms of health, while adolescence is a relatively healthy period in the lifespan, the most prominent cause of death for girls in the developing world, age 15 to 19, is from maternal causes associated with pregnancy. In countries with heavy HIV/AIDS burden, 3 out of 4 new HIV infections are in women 15 to 24. Girls are also heavily burdened by neuropsychiatric disorders, burns, and violence. And there's been recent, really important recent statistical information from the World Health Organization that has documented this. In addition, girls are adopting the kinds of health behaviors that contribute to the looming chronic disease burden in terms of tobacco use, obesity, and unsafe sex, often in abusive relationships. The social vulnerability of adolescent girls throughout the world, and certainly in developing countries, it has to be really of great importance for us to think about. Beyond the limited education opportunities, girls face exploitive work conditions, often as domestic workers. Child marriage, as I said earlier, certainly on the right trend, but still in some countries more than half of girls under 18 are married. Half of marriages occur to girls under 18, sorry. And underneath all of this, and I think this has also been discussed in the meeting, the prevailing inequality between the genders. So these facts call us to act, to focus on adolescent girls, because the girls themselves matter. There's an imperative of human rights, dignity, and the need to fulfill human capacities, but also because the girls and the women they come play a special role in physical and social reproduction, in making the societies of which they're a part resilient to those problems and challenges ahead. Investing in girls, improving the welfare of girls, can mean greater economic growth with more competitive labor force and lower dependency ratios. Girls who are better educated, healthier, have smaller families, that can lead to a kind of demographic bonus as a larger share of the population is in the working ages and a smaller share in the very young ages and very old. Investing in girls can mean a more involved and active citizenry and stronger governance. I think many of the emerging successes in the African continent are, there's a strong contribution of women leaders, women parliamentarians, and even presidents. A healthier, better educated next generation comes from the investments in adolescent girls today. I think we're all familiar with the very well-documented relationship between better educated mothers and better health of children. And it's estimated that for every year of mothers' schooling, infant mortality declines by 5 to 10%. And in recent work by my colleague David Wheeler at the Center for Global Development, there's a strong case to be made for women's education, the education of girls, being a very effective measure to address climate change, largely through the effects on, the predictable effects on fertility. I think we can, thinking about this ambitious agenda, we can take encouragement from the words and the deeds that public leaders are making now. So in Vietnam, there's a new youth law and a national master plan for adolescent and youth health. In Uganda, there is a network of 500 clubs reaching about 13,000 girls, and a very active NGO activities. In Nicaragua, there's a national youth policy which is quite comprehensive. Internationally, we've seen the World Health Organization pay particular attention to women's health, and within that, to the health of adolescent girls. And within the US, I think you heard earlier from Milan Verveer, and I'm sure, I wasn't here to hear, but I'm sure that she expressed the Obama administration's strong commitment to the health and well-being of women and girls. And that's reflected in the Global Health Initiative, which is just getting off the ground and will be committing both the HIV/AIDS and other global health resources to women-centered and girl-centered approaches. And I'm working on the evaluation framework for that, so I can tell you that we will pay attention to the impact on the health of adolescent girls. So now I'm going to turn to my call for help in closing. What I can see now is how much help we need to think through how to not just understand the problems that will emerge from those 5 important trends I talked about, but how to use those trends to achieve the greatest benefits for the future. So what does that mean? It means thinking through, as I know you have, how the trend toward urbanization can actually be used to improve health. What are the different kinds of models of health service delivery that are possible in urban settings that are simply very difficult or impossible in rural ones with more dispersed populations? What are the kinds of insurance mechanisms that can be developed in places where there's high population density? What's the role of the private sector, which is more active in urban areas, in providing health care? What are the kinds of investments that can be made in the urban health infrastructure that can mitigate some of the health problems that would otherwise occur? Think about the relatively rapid economic growth that we can expect in India and China and elsewhere in the developing world. What can we do? It is now a draw for private investment. How can that be oriented in some ways to promote better health and welfare? Certainly an example that comes up again and again is how the prevalence of mobile technologies can be used to meet human needs. Think even about the rise of chronic disease in developing countries as both a problem and potentially as an opportunity. Though it sounds strange, I think that there is an opportunity that occurs when there's greater convergence in the health problems around the world. Because what it means is that investments in research and development that are oriented toward one market can benefit those in other markets. Now, of course, we have to work on things like the business model of the pharmaceutical companies, but I think that it's potentially an easier problem than when there's great divergence in the epidemiologic profiles. We need government leaders, we need academics, we need those in the private sector, all of you, to be thinking creatively, not of these trends as huge problems to be fought against, but rather as things that will happen that we need to leverage and take advantage of in a way to have as good outcomes as possible. So that's my plea, is that now that I'm on the receiving end of strong evidence-based recommendations, you work together to provide those, thinking about what the long-term trends are and what the implications are for the public policies that we should make today. So with that, thank you very much. I am deeply honored to have received the award.